Sarah Mitchell had always trusted too easily. At 32, she possessed the kind of gentle nature that made people feel comfortable sharing their deepest secrets. Her friends often joked that she could find good in a serial killer, but they said it with fondness. Sarah's optimism was infectious, her smile genuine and her heart wide open to the world around her. Living in the small coastal town of Millfield, Sarah had built what seemed like a perfect life. She owned a successful flower shop on Main Street, had saved nearly $200,000 through years of careful planning, and was engaged to Marcus Webb, the town's most eligible bachelor. Marcus came from old money, his family owning half the businesses in Millfield, including the bank where Sarah kept her life savings. Their relationship had blossomed over 18 months, beginning when Marcus first walked into her shop claiming he needed flowers for his mother's grave. Sarah had been touched by his apparent grief, spending extra time helping him choose the perfect arrangement of white lilies and baby's breath. What she didn't know was that Marcus's mother was very much alive, living comfortably in a retirement home 3 towns over. Marcus had noticed Sarah months before that first visit. He'd watched her through the shop window, observed her daily routines, learned about her habits from mutual acquaintances. More importantly, he'd discovered through his position at the bank exactly how much money the quiet florist had accumulated. His interest in Sarah was purely financial, though he played the role of devoted lover with practiced skill. Their engagement came with great fanfare in Millfield. Marcus proposed during the town's annual harvest festival, getting down on one knee in front of hundreds of witnesses. Sarah said yes through tears of joy, believing she had found her soulmate. The ring was gorgeous, the moment perfect, and everyone in town seemed genuinely happy for the couple. What Sarah didn't realize was that Marcus had been planning her death since their 3rd date. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus had convinced Sarah to make him the beneficiary of her life insurance policy and to add his name to her bank accounts after their engagement. He explained it was just practical planning for married couples, and Sarah, trusting as always, had signed every document he placed before her without reading the fine print. Marcus's accomplice was his childhood friend David Chen, a man struggling with gambling debts and desperate for money. David owed dangerous people significant sums, and Marcus had offered him $50,000 to help stage an accident. For David, it seemed like the answer to his prayers, though he tried not to think too deeply about what they were planning to do to the kind woman who always remembered his coffee order at the local diner. The plan centered around Eagles Point, a scenic clifftop area about 20 minutes outside Millfield where couples often went to watch sunsets. The cliff dropped nearly 200 feet into rocky waters below, and the area was known for its dangerous crumbling edges. Several people had fallen to their deaths there over the years, making it the perfect location for what would appear to be a tragic accident. Marcus had been taking Sarah to Eagles Point regularly for weeks, establishing a pattern that would seem natural to anyone who knew them. He'd pack romantic picnics, bring blankets, and they'd spend hours talking about their future together, while Sarah's feet dangled over the edge of the cliff. Each visit, Marcus carefully noted the exact spots where the ground seemed most unstable. On the chosen evening, everything appeared normal. Marcus picked Sarah up at 6 o'clock, just as he had dozens of times before. Sarah had spent the afternoon arranging flowers for the Henderson wedding, humming softly to herself as she worked. She'd even prepared a special surprise for Marcus, a photo album of their relationship that she planned to give him during their clifftop picnic. They drove to Eagles Point in Marcus's black SUV, Sarah chattering excitedly about wedding plans and her ideas for expanding the flower shop. Marcus nodded and smiled at appropriate moments, but his mind was focused on the task ahead. David would already be in position, hidden among the trees near the cliff's edge, waiting for Marcus's signal. As they walked toward their usual spot, Sarah's hand warm in his, Marcus felt a momentary pang of something that might have been guilt. Sarah was genuinely kind, truly innocent, and absolutely trusting. For just a moment he wondered if there might be another way to solve his financial problems. But then he remembered the life insurance payout, the money in her accounts, and the debts that were crushing his own family's business empire. His resolve hardened. They spread their blanket near the cliff's edge as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Sarah pulled out her photo album, her eyes bright with excitement as she began flipping through the pages, pointing out her favorite memories of their time together. Marcus barely listened, his attention focused on David's position in the woods and the exact distance between Sarah and the cliff's edge. The moment came sooner than expected. Sarah stood up to get a better view of the sunset, walking closer to the cliff than usual. Marcus caught David's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. This was it. David emerged from his hiding spot, moving silently behind Sarah as Marcus engaged her in conversation about the beautiful view. Sarah never saw it coming. One moment she was pointing out a boat on the distant horizon, and the next she felt strong hands pushing her hard from behind. She had just enough time to turn and see Marcus's face, not David's, before she tumbled over the edge. The look of shock and betrayal in her eyes would haunt Marcus for months afterward, though he tried to convince himself it was just the dim light playing tricks on his memory. The fall seemed to last forever. Sarah's body bounced off rocky outcroppings twice before hitting the water, with a sickening impact that echoed off the cliff walls. Marcus and David stood frozen for several seconds, staring down at the dark water where Sarah had disappeared. There was no movement, no desperate swimming. Nothing but the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below. They waited 15 minutes before Marcus called the police, practicing his story about how his fiancée had slipped while trying to get a better view of the sunset. David had already melted back into the woods following their planned escape route. By the time the rescue teams arrived, it was fully dark, and the search would have to wait until morning. The impact with the water should have killed Sarah Mitchell instantly. The fall from Eagles Point was nearly 200 feet, and the rocky outcroppings she struck on the way down had broken 3 ribs and her left arm. When she hit the icy Atlantic waters, she was barely conscious, her body screaming in agony as salt water filled her lungs. But Sarah had always been a strong swimmer. Even in her dazed state, some primal survival instinct kicked in, forcing her to fight against the darkness that wanted to pull her under. The current was vicious, dragging her away from the base of the cliff and out toward the open ocean. Each breath was agony, each stroke of her one good arm a monumental effort that sent lightning bolts of pain through her broken ribs. She managed to stay afloat for nearly an hour, drifting further and further from shore as hypothermia began to set in. Her wedding dress, the beautiful white gown she'd worn for their romantic picnic, became waterlogged and heavy, threatening to drag her down with every wave, just when Sarah felt her strength finally giving out. When the cold had numbed her body beyond feeling, she saw a light cutting through the darkness. The fishing vessel Mary Catherine was returning late from a day of deep-sea fishing when Captain Joe Morrison spotted something white floating in the water. At first he thought it might be debris or a dead seal, but something made him take a closer look. When his spotlight illuminated Sarah's pale face barely above the surface, Joe's 30 years of maritime experience kicked into high gear. "Man overboard," he shouted to his crew, though he could see this was no member of his team. Within minutes they had Sarah aboard, wrapped in every blanket they could find while Joe's nephew Tommy, who had EMT training, worked frantically to stabilize her vital signs. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness during the 40-minute ride to the nearest hospital, mumbling incoherently about Marcus and being pushed. Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds was finishing her shift at Coastal General Hospital when the fishing boat arrived. She'd seen plenty of maritime accidents over her 15 years in emergency medicine, but something about Sarah's injuries puzzled her immediately. The pattern of trauma was consistent with a high fall, but the woman kept insisting she'd been pushed, not that she'd slipped or jumped. "He pushed me," Sarah whispered through swollen lips, her eyes struggling to focus on the doctor's face. "Marcus, he pushed me. They wanted me dead." Dr. Reynolds had heard trauma victims say many strange things in their confused state, but Sarah's story remained consistent, even as her condition stabilized over the following days. The doctor made careful notes in Sarah's chart, documenting not just her physical injuries but also her repeated claims about being pushed from the cliff by her fiancé and another man. Meanwhile, back in Millfield, Marcus was playing the role of grieving fiancé to perfection. The search for Sarah's body had been called off after 3 days when no trace of her was found. The Coast Guard explained to Marcus that the currents in that area were notoriously strong, and bodies were often carried far out to sea, never to be recovered. The town rallied around Marcus in his supposed time of grief. Flowers poured into his family's business, sympathy cards filled his mailbox, and old friends stopped by to offer condolences and share memories of Sarah. Marcus accepted it all with the appropriate mixture of gratitude and sorrow, though privately, he was already planning how to access Sarah's bank accounts and collect the life insurance money. David Chen had received his $50,000 and immediately used it to pay off his most pressing gambling debts. He tried to put the events at Eagles Point out of his mind, convincing himself that Sarah's death had been necessary and that she probably hadn't suffered much. But late at night, when he was alone with his thoughts, he kept seeing her face in those final moments before she fell. 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus filed a petition to have Sarah declared legally dead. It was an unusual step so soon after her disappearance, but Marcus's family lawyer argued that the circumstances clearly indicated an accidental death, and that prolonging the uncertainty would only cause Marcus additional suffering. The sympathetic judge agreed to expedite the process, but Sarah was very much alive, recovering slowly in a hospital room 200 miles up the coast. Dr. Reynolds had quietly moved her, patient, to a different hospital under an assumed
name after Sarah convinced her that someone had tried to kill her.
The doctor's instincts told her that Sarah was telling the truth, especially after she noticed that no one had reported the woman missing, despite her obvious local connections. Sarah's recovery was agonizing, both physically and emotionally. Her broken ribs healed slowly, leaving her in constant pain for months. The break in her arm required surgery and extensive physical therapy. But the emotional wounds ran much deeper. The man she'd loved, the man she'd planned to marry, had tried to murder her for money. Every person she'd trusted, every assumption she'd made about human nature, had been shattered along with her bones. As Sarah grew stronger, her determination grew as well. She spent hours researching Marcus's family finances, using the hospital's computer to dig into public records and news articles. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Marcus's family business was hemorrhaging money, had been for years. They were facing bankruptcy, lawsuits, and the potential loss of everything they'd built over generations. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Marcus hadn't fallen in love with her. He'd selected her as a victim. Her money, her life insurance, her trusting nature. It had all made her the perfect target for his desperate scheme. The romantic proposal, the sweet words, the future they'd planned together. None of it had been real. Dr. Reynolds helped Sarah contact a private investigator, a former police detective named Maria Santos, who specialized in cases involving attempted murder. Maria listened to Sarah's story with the skeptical ear of someone who'd heard every possible tale of human deception. But Sarah's detailed account and the supporting medical evidence convinced her that something sinister had indeed occurred. Together, they began building a case. Maria's investigation revealed that Marcus had indeed been asking questions about Sarah's financial situation months before they'd started dating. She discovered that David Chen had suddenly paid off significant gambling debts just days after Sarah's disappearance. Most damning of all, she found security footage from a gas station showing Marcus and David together on the afternoon of the accident, clearly planning something in Marcus's car. But Sarah knew that evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Marcus was from a powerful family with connections throughout the legal system. David could claim he'd loaned him money for legitimate reasons. The security footage was suggestive but not conclusive. If Sarah was going to get justice, she would need to be much more creative in her approach. As her body healed, Sarah's mind began working on a different kind of recovery. A carefully planned revenge that would destroy Marcus as thoroughly as he had tried to destroy her. She would have to remain dead in the eyes of the world, at least for now. She would have to become someone else, someone Marcus wouldn't recognize until it was too late. The gentle florist who had trusted everyone was gone, lost forever in the dark waters off Eagles Point. In her place was emerging someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who understood exactly how cruel the world could be, and who was prepared to use that knowledge to her advantage. Sarah Mitchell was officially declared dead 6 months after her fall from Eagles Point. The memorial service was beautiful, held in Millfield's oldest church with flowers from every shop in town except her own, which had been closed since her disappearance. Marcus delivered a heartbreaking eulogy about losing the love of his life, his voice breaking at all the right moments as he spoke about their plans for the future that would never be. 200 miles away, the woman who had once been Sarah Mitchell watched the live stream of her own memorial service from a small apartment she'd rented under the name Catherine Wells. She'd chosen the identity carefully, using documents that Maria Santos had helped her obtain through less-than-legal channels. Catherine Wells had no history, no connections, and most importantly, no reason to be in Millfield. The transformation had taken months of careful planning. Sarah had lost 30 pounds during her recovery, and her hair had grown out from its previous shoulder-length style into long, dark waves after she'd dyed away her natural blonde color. Colored contact lenses changed her eyes from blue to brown, and subtle makeup techniques altered the shape of her face. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. But the physical changes were only part of her metamorphosis. Sarah had spent countless hours studying Marcus's routines, his business dealings, and his weaknesses. Through her private investigator and careful online research, she'd learned everything there was to know about the man who had tried to kill her and the life he was building on what he thought was her grave. Marcus had indeed collected the life insurance money, $500,000, that should have secured his family's business for years to come. He'd also gained access to Sarah's savings account, though he'd been careful to withdraw the money slowly to avoid suspicion. In total, Marcus had profited nearly $700,000 from Sarah's supposed death. He'd used the money exactly as Sarah had predicted. The Webb family's construction business had been saved from bankruptcy, their debts paid off, and Marcus had even purchased a new luxury car and a boat. He'd also started dating again, much sooner than was considered appropriate by the gossips of Millfield. His new girlfriend was Lisa Chen, David's younger sister, a nurse at the local hospital who had no idea her boyfriend had murdered his previous fiancée with her brother's help. David Chen had also seemed to benefit from Sarah's death. His gambling debts were paid, and he'd even managed to secure a loan to open a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. But Sarah could see through her surveillance that David was struggling with guilt. He drank more than he used to, jumped at unexpected sounds, and had developed a nervous habit of constantly looking over his shoulder. Sarah's apartment became a command center for her revenge operation. One wall was covered with photos, timelines, and documents mapping out every aspect of Marcus and David's lives. She'd identified their routines, their relationships, their fears, and most importantly, their new vulnerabilities. Both men had built their post-murder lives on foundations that could be easily shaken if the right pressure was applied in the right places. Her first target was David, whom she correctly identified as the weaker link in the conspiracy. Through weeks of observation, Sarah learned that David visited his elderly mother every Tuesday evening, always stopping at the same small grocery store to buy her favorite cookies and tea. It was there that Catherine Wells would make her first appearance in Millfield. The encounter was carefully orchestrated to seem accidental. Sarah, now fully transformed into Catherine, deliberately bumped into David in the store's narrow aisles, causing him to drop the cookies he was carrying. She apologized profusely, insisting on buying him new ones while engaging him in seemingly innocent conversation. "You look familiar," she said, studying his face with just the right amount of confusion. "Have we met somewhere before?" David's response was immediate and telling. His face went pale, his hands began to shake, and he mumbled something about being new in town before practically running from the store. Sarah had her confirmation that David's guilt was eating at him, making him paranoid and jumpy. This psychological weakness would be crucial to her plans. Over the following weeks, Catherine Wells began appearing in David's life with increasing frequency. She'd be in line behind him at the coffee shop, browsing books at the library when he arrived, or walking past his auto repair shop at precisely the times she knew he'd be looking out the window. Each encounter was brief and seemingly coincidental, but Sarah made sure David noticed her each time. The psychological pressure was having its intended effect. David became increasingly nervous and distracted. His work suffered, he started missing appointments, and his drinking increased significantly. His friends and family began to worry about his mental health. But David couldn't explain his growing paranoia without revealing what he and Marcus had done. Meanwhile, Sarah was also gathering intelligence on Marcus's new life. His relationship with Lisa Chen provided an unexpected opportunity for revenge that was almost poetic in its symmetry. Lisa was a good person, much like Sarah had been, and she genuinely cared for Marcus. She had no idea she was dating a murderer who was using her brother's guilt to ensure his silence. Through careful observation and some creative hacking of social media accounts, Sarah learned that Marcus was planning to propose to Lisa on the 1-year anniversary of Sarah's death. The location he'd chosen for this proposal was particularly offensive to Sarah. He intended to take Lisa to Eagles Point, the same cliff from which he'd tried to murder his previous fiancée. This gave Sarah a timeline for her revenge. She had exactly 3 months to complete her preparation and put her plan into motion. The irony of Marcus returning to the scene of his crime for another romantic milestone was too perfect to ignore. Sarah would ensure that this return to Eagles Point would be very different from what Marcus was expecting. Her planning became more intensive and detailed. She studied the cliff area during different weather conditions and times of day, identifying the best positions for surveillance and intervention. She practiced with the recording equipment she'd purchased, ensuring she could capture clear audio and video even in challenging conditions. Most importantly, she began the delicate process of turning David's paranoia into outright panic. The breakthrough came during Catherine's 7th accidental encounter with David. This time, she approached him directly outside his repair shop, claiming her car was making strange noises. As David reluctantly agreed to take a look under the hood, Catherine made casual conversation about the beautiful coastal scenery in Millfield. "I especially love Eagles Point," she said, watching David's face carefully. "Though I heard someone fell from there last year. Such a tragedy. I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been for the poor woman." David's wrench slipped, scraping his knuckles as his hands began to shake uncontrollably. He mumbled something about not knowing what she was talking about and quickly closed the hood of her car, claiming he couldn't find anything wrong with it. But Sarah could see that her words had hit their target. David was now completely convinced that somehow, impossibly, someone knew what he and Marcus had done. That night, David called Marcus for the first time since receiving his payment months earlier. The conversation was brief and cryptic, but Sarah's carefully placed listening devices picked up enough to confirm that David was cracking under the pressure. He wanted to meet with Marcus, wanted to discuss the situation, and was becoming increasingly convinced that they were being watched. Marcus, comfortable in his new life and confident that their crime had been perfect, dismissed David's concerns as paranoia brought on by too much drinking. This dismissal would prove to be a critical mistake. By failing to take David's fears seriously, Marcus had created a vulnerability that Sarah was perfectly positioned to exploit. As Sarah listened to the recorded conversation, she smiled for the first time since her fall from the cliff. Her enemies were beginning to turn against each other, exactly as she had hoped. The foundation of their partnership was cracking, and soon it would crumble entirely. When it did, Sarah would be there to ensure that both men paid the full price for what they had done to her. The meeting between Marcus and David took place on a cold Tuesday night at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Millfield. Sarah had anticipated this would happen eventually, and she'd prepared accordingly. Hidden cameras and recording devices were already in place, positioned to capture every word and gesture that would finally provide the concrete evidence she needed. David arrived first, chain-smoking cigarettes as he paced nervously in the empty parking lot. His paranoia had reached a breaking point over the past few days after Catherine Wells had appeared at 3 more locations he frequented. Each encounter had been brief and seemingly innocent, but David was now convinced that Sarah Mitchell had somehow survived and was hunting them. Marcus pulled up 20 minutes late in his new BMW. Annoyed at having to meet in such a desolate location, he'd been enjoying dinner with Lisa when David's frantic call interrupted their evening. Lisa had been understanding when Marcus explained he needed to help an old friend with a crisis, never suspecting that the crisis involved her own brother's role in a murder. "This better be important, David," Marcus said as he stepped out of his car, his breath visible in the cold air. "Lisa and I were having a nice evening before you called." David stubbed out his cigarette and turned to face his former partner in crime. The guilt and alcohol had taken their toll over the past months, leaving him gaunt and hollow-eyed. His hands shook as he pulled out another cigarette, struggling to light it in the wind. "She's alive, Marcus," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah's alive, and she knows what we did." Marcus rolled his eyes and checked his expensive watch impatiently. "David, we've been through this. Sarah Mitchell is dead. We watched her fall. The Coast Guard searched for days and found nothing. You collected your money, I collected mine. And now we both need to move on with our lives." "Then explain this," David said, pulling out his phone and showing Marcus a photo he'd secretly taken of Catherine Wells outside the grocery store. "This woman has been following me for weeks. She looks exactly like Sarah, just with different hair and eye color. She even mentioned Eagles Point, Marcus. She knows." Marcus studied the photo, his confident expression faltering slightly. There was something familiar about the woman's bone structure, the shape of her face, but he pushed the thought away. Dead people didn't come back for revenge no matter what happened in movies. "It's just someone who resembles her," Marcus said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "You're letting guilt make you paranoid. Sarah Mitchell is dead, buried at the bottom of the ocean, and that's the end of it." From her hiding spot in the warehouse rafters, Sarah watched the two men through night vision scope, every word being captured by her recording equipment. This was exactly the kind of conversation she'd hoped to provoke, Marcus essentially confessing to the murder while trying to calm David's fears. "I can't live with this anymore," David said, beginning to pace again. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her face when she realized what was happening. She trusted us, Marcus. She never hurt anyone in her entire life, and we killed her for money." "Keep your voice down," Marcus hissed, looking around the empty parking lot nervously. "And we didn't kill anyone. She slipped and fell. That was always the story, and that's what everyone believes. She didn't slip." David exploded, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "I pushed her, Marcus. I put my hands on her back and shoved her off that cliff because you promised me $50,000. We committed murder." The confession hung in the cold night air like a physical thing. Even Marcus seemed shocked by David's outburst, taking a step backward as the reality of what they'd done was spoken aloud for the first time since that night at Eagles Point. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction as she watched Marcus's face change. His casual dismissal of David's concerns was replaced by genuine worry as he realized his partner was completely losing control. The psychological pressure she'd been applying had worked even better than she'd hoped. "Listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, moving closer to David and speaking in a low, dangerous voice. "Sarah Mitchell fell from a cliff. It was an accident. That's what happened, that's what the police believe, and that's what you're going to keep believing. If you start talking about pushing and murder, you'll destroy both our lives." "Maybe that's what needs to happen," David replied, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Maybe I should go to the police and tell them everything. At least then I might be able to sleep at night." The threat was more than Marcus could tolerate. His family's reputation, his new relationship with Lisa, his entire future depended on David keeping their secret. Without thinking, Marcus grabbed David by the jacket and shoved him against the side of the warehouse. "You're not going to the police," Marcus snarled. "You're not going to ruin my life because you can't handle a little guilt. Sarah Mitchell was a means to an end, nothing more. She was going to die eventually anyway. We just helped nature along a little bit." Sarah had to clench her fists to keep from intervening as she watched Marcus physically intimidate David. Every instinct told her to climb down from her hiding spot and confront the man who had tried to kill her, but she knew this was exactly the kind of evidence she needed. Marcus was revealing his true character, the cold calculation behind his charming facade. "You're a monster," David whispered, staring at Marcus with a mixture of fear and disgust. "I always knew you were ruthless in business, but I never realized you were completely without conscience." "Conscience is a luxury I can't afford," Marcus replied, releasing his grip on David's jacket. "My family's business was going under, and Sarah's death solved that problem. Sometimes you have to make hard choices to survive." "It wasn't a hard choice for you at all, was it?" David asked, sudden clarity replacing his earlier panic. "You planned this from the beginning. You targeted Sarah specifically because she was trusting and had money. You probably never felt a moment's guilt about any of it." Marcus straightened his jacket and smiled coldly. "Guilt is for people who can't see the bigger picture. Sarah served her purpose just like you served yours. Now I suggest you go home, stop drinking so much, and forget about mysterious women who remind you of dead people." From her hiding spot, Sarah realized that this conversation had given her everything she needed and more. Not only did she have Marcus confessing to murder, but she also had proof of his complete lack of remorse and his willingness to threaten David to maintain his secret. As the two men prepared to leave the warehouse, Sarah made her own preparations. Phase 1 of her revenge was complete. She had the evidence needed to destroy both men legally. But legal justice wouldn't be enough after what she'd heard tonight. Marcus's casual dismissal of her life, his description of her as nothing more than a means to an end, demanded something more personal. The time had come for Catherine Wells to disappear and for Sarah Mitchell to make her return from the dead. But this time she would be the one with all the advantages, and her enemies would be the ones facing a fall they would never survive. Watching Marcus drive away in his luxury car, probably returning to his warm dinner with his innocent girlfriend, Sarah felt her determination crystallize into something hard and sharp. Marcus thought he was untouchable, protected by his family's money and connections. David thought his guilt was the worst punishment he would face. They were both about to learn how wrong they were. The woman they had tried to murder for money was coming back, and this time she would be the one deciding who lived and who died. The anniversary of Sarah's death arrived with unusual warmth for October in Millfield. Marcus had planned everything perfectly for his proposal to Lisa Chen. He'd made dinner reservations at the town's finest restaurant, purchased an expensive engagement ring, and arranged for a photographer to secretly capture the moment he asked Lisa to marry him at Eagles Point, the same location where he'd murdered his previous fiancée exactly 1 year earlier. What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah had been monitoring his plans for weeks. She'd hacked his email, listened to his phone calls, and even obtained a copy of his credit card statements showing the ring purchase. Every detail of his romantic evening was known to her, and she had prepared accordingly. Lisa Chen had spent the day excited about what she sensed would be a special evening with Marcus. At 28, she was ready for marriage and had been hoping Marcus would propose soon. She'd noticed he'd been more attentive lately, more affectionate, and she'd caught him looking at rings when they walked past jewelry stores. Tonight felt like the night her dreams would come true. She had no idea that her own brother had helped murder Marcus's previous girlfriend, or that Marcus was planning to propose at the exact spot where he'd committed that murder. In her innocent mind, Marcus was a successful businessman who'd tragically lost his first love and had been lucky enough to find love again with her. David Chen had not been invited to participate in Marcus's new romantic milestone, but he knew what was happening. Marcus had mentioned his proposal plans during their warehouse confrontation, partly to emphasize how much David stood to lose if he went to the police. The irony of the location wasn't lost on David, and it had pushed his guilt to even greater heights. As the sun began to set, David found himself driving toward Eagles Point against his better judgment. He told himself he just wanted to make sure Marcus went through with the proposal, that this new relationship might help his former partner move on from their shared crime. But deep down he knew he was hoping for something else. Perhaps some sign that Sarah Mitchell's spirit wasn't at peace, that the universe would somehow intervene to stop Marcus from desecrating the scene of his crime with another romantic gesture. Marcus and Lisa arrived at Eagles Point just as the sky began turning brilliant shades of orange and pink. Lisa commented on how beautiful the sunset was, and Marcus agreed while privately thinking about how Sarah had said almost the same thing moments before he'd had her pushed to her death. "This place is so romantic," Lisa said, walking closer to the cliff's edge to get a better view of the ocean. "I can see why you like to come here." Marcus felt a momentary chill as he watched Lisa standing in almost the exact spot where Sarah had been when David pushed her. For just a moment he could see Sarah's face superimposed over Lisa's, could hear her voice talking about their future together. He shook off the disturbing image and pulled out the engagement ring. "Lisa," he began, getting down on one knee as he'd practiced, "you've brought light back into my life after I thought I'd lost everything. Will you marry me?" Lisa's hands flew to her mouth in surprise and joy. "Yes," she cried, reaching for the ring with tears in her eyes. "Yes, of course." It was at that moment that Sarah Mitchell stepped out from behind the trees at the edge of the clearing. She was no longer disguised as Catherine Wells. Her natural blonde hair had been restored and styled, exactly as it had been a year ago. She wore the same white dress she'd been wearing when Marcus tried to have her killed, though this one was clean and new rather than waterlogged and torn. Most dramatically, she looked exactly as she had on the night of her supposed death, young, trusting, and very much alive. Lisa saw her first and gasped, taking several steps backward. "Marcus," she whispered, "who is that woman? She looks just like the pictures of your fiancé who died." Marcus turned around slowly, his face going white as he saw what appeared to be Sarah's ghost standing 20 feet away. The engagement ring slipped from his fingers and rolled toward the cliff's edge as he struggled to process what he was seeing. "Hello, Marcus," Sarah said calmly, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Did you miss me?" The sound of her voice speaking his name shattered Marcus's paralysis. This wasn't a ghost or a hallucination brought on by guilt. This was Sarah Mitchell, alive and standing before him exactly 1 year after he'd watched her fall to what should have been her death. "You're dead," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "You fell. I saw you fall." "I did fall," Sarah replied, taking a step closer. "You and David made sure of that, didn't you? But sometimes people survive things they're not supposed to survive. Sometimes they come back stronger." Lisa looked between Marcus and Sarah with growing confusion and fear. "Marcus, what is she talking about? Who is David? What does she mean you made sure she fell?" Sarah turned her attention to Lisa, her expression softening with genuine sympathy. "Lisa, I'm sorry you have to learn about your boyfriend this way. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and exactly 1 year ago tonight, Marcus and your brother David tried to murder me for my life insurance money." The words hit Lisa like physical blows. She staggered backward, shaking her head in denial. "That's impossible. Marcus loved you. He grieved for you. And David would never. He's my brother." "Your brother pushed me off this cliff while Marcus watched," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. "They split nearly $700,000 from my death. The man you're about to marry is a killer, Lisa." Marcus finally found his voice, his shock giving way to desperate calculation. "She's lying, Lisa. She's obviously disturbed, probably escaped from some mental institution. The real Sarah Mitchell died a year ago. This woman is an imposter trying to extort money from us." But even as Marcus spoke, Lisa was studying Sarah's face more closely. The bone structure was identical to the photos she'd seen. The voice matched recordings she'd heard of Marcus's voicemails from Sarah. Most convincing of all was the way Marcus was acting. Not like a man confronting a stranger making wild accusations, but like a man whose darkest secret had just been exposed. "If you're really Sarah Mitchell," Lisa said shakily, "prove it. Tell me something only she would know." Sarah smiled sadly. "Marcus has a scar on his left shoulder from when he fell off his bike as a child. He told me about it during our 3rd date, said his mother was so worried she made him wear a helmet everywhere for a month. He also has a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on his right hip. And he's allergic to shellfish but pretends not to be because he thinks it makes him seem weak." Lisa's face went pale as each intimate detail confirmed what she was beginning to understand. These weren't things a stranger could know. This was information only shared between lovers. Details Marcus had probably told Sarah during their most private moments together. "Lisa, don't listen to her," Marcus said desperately, reaching for his girlfriend's arm. "Anyone could have learned those things. She's been stalking us, probably watching us, gathering information to use against us." Lisa jerked away from Marcus's touch as if it burned her. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Did you try to kill her? Did David help you?" Before Marcus could answer, David Chen's car pulled into the parking area below the cliff. He'd been wrestling with his conscience all day, and something had finally driven him to come to Eagles Point tonight. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity, or maybe some subconscious need to confess his sins. Whatever the reason, his arrival completed the gathering of everyone involved in the tragic events of 1 year ago. David climbed the path to the cliff top slowly, his steps heavy with dread. When he reached the clearing and saw Sarah standing there alive and whole, he simply stopped walking and stared. Unlike Marcus, David felt no shock or disbelief, only a profound sense of inevitability, as if he'd known this moment would come eventually. "Hello, David," Sarah said, acknowledging his presence without taking her eyes off Marcus and Lisa. "I was wondering when you'd show up." David said nothing, but his presence answered Lisa's question more definitively than any words could have. Her brother's expression was that of a man confronting his greatest fear, not someone confused by a stranger's accusations. "My God," Lisa whispered, the full reality of the situation finally sinking in. "You actually did it. You both actually tried to kill her." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below. Marcus realized that his denials were useless now, that the truth was written on David's face and confirmed by Sarah's impossible presence. His carefully constructed new life was crumbling around him, and with it, all his hopes for the future. Why? Lisa asked, her voice breaking. Sarah, why did they do this to you? Money, Sarah replied simply. Marcus's family business was going bankrupt. He needed my life insurance payout and my savings account to survive. So he courted me, gained my trust, made me fall in love with him, and then arranged for me to have a fatal accident. It wasn't supposed to be personal, Marcus said suddenly, his voice hollow. You were just available. You had what I needed to save my family's legacy. Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder, holding it up so everyone could see it clearly. Every word you just said is being recorded, Marcus. Your confession, your complete lack of remorse, your admission that you'd do it again, it's all here. Marcus's eyes darted to the device, then back to Sarah's face. For the first time since her appearance, he looked genuinely afraid. That won't hold up in court. It was recorded without consent. Actually, it will, Sarah replied calmly. I've spent the last year learning about the law, Marcus. Single-party consent recording is perfectly legal in this state when the person doing the recording is a victim of the crime being discussed. Besides, this isn't the only evidence I have. She pulled out her phone and began playing audio from the warehouse meeting between Marcus and David. Their voices filled the evening air, crystal clear as they discussed the murder, the cover-up, and Marcus's threats to David. Lisa listened in horror as her brother's voice admitted to pushing Sarah off the cliff for $50,000. I have hours of recordings, Sarah continued. Phone calls, meetings, even Marcus discussing his proposal plans while mocking my memory. I also have financial records showing the suspicious timing of David's debt payments and Marcus's insurance claims. Most importantly, I have something neither of you expected, a living witness to your crime. David finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. The guilt has been eating me alive for a year. Your guilt doesn't bring back the life you stole from me, Sarah replied, her gaze shifting to David. Do you know what it's like to spend months in a hospital bed learning to walk again, having nightmares every night about the people you trusted pushing you to your death? Lisa was crying now, the full weight of her situation crushing down on her. Her brother was a murderer. The man she loved was a monster, and she was standing at the site where they'd committed their crime. David, how could you? How could you do something so horrible? I was desperate, David said, tears streaming down his face. I owed money to dangerous people. They were threatening to kill me if I didn't pay. When Marcus offered me $50,000 for what he said would be a quick accident, I thought it was my only way out. You thought wrong, Sarah said coldly. You both did. Marcus was studying Sarah's positioning, calculating distances and possibilities. They were standing near the edge of the same cliff from which they'd tried to kill her a year ago. If he could somehow push her again, this time making sure she didn't survive, he might still be able to salvage the situation. But Sarah had anticipated this. She'd spent months preparing for this confrontation, and she knew exactly how Marcus's mind worked. As he took a casual step in her direction, she raised her phone. I wouldn't try it, Marcus. This phone is live streaming everything to 3 different locations. Maria Santos, my private investigator, is watching from her office. Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds, the doctor who saved my life, is recording from her home. And Detective James Morrison of the state police is documenting everything from his car at the bottom of this cliff. As if summoned by her words, police sirens began wailing in the distance, growing steadily louder. Marcus spun around to look down the cliff road and saw multiple police vehicles racing toward Eagles Point, their lights flashing in the gathering darkness. You see, Marcus, I didn't come here just for a confession, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the approaching sirens. I came here to end this properly, with justice, not revenge. The first police car reached the parking area, followed quickly by 2 more. Detective Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the state police, led a team of officers up the path to the cliff top. He'd been working with Maria Santos for weeks, building a case based on Sarah's evidence and testimony. Marcus Webb and David Chen, Detective Morrison called out as he reached the clearing. You're both under arrest for the attempted murder of Sarah Mitchell and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Marcus made one last desperate attempt to maintain his innocence. Officer, this woman is disturbed. She's been harassing us, threatening us. We're the victims here. Detective Morrison smiled grimly. Mr. Webb, we've been listening to your conversation for the past 30 minutes. We heard your full confession, including your statement that you're not sorry for trying to kill Ms. Mitchell and that your only regret is not making sure she was dead. As the officers moved to handcuff Marcus and David, Lisa collapsed to her knees, sobbing. The man she'd planned to marry was a killer, and her own brother had been his accomplice. Her entire world had just crumbled around her, and she didn't know how she would ever rebuild it. Sarah knelt beside Lisa, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way. I know you loved him, and I know this hurts, but you deserve better than a man who sees other people as transactions. How can you be kind to me? Lisa sobbed. My brother tried to kill you. The man I loved used you and threw you away like garbage. Because you're innocent in all this, Sarah replied softly. You're a victim too, Lisa. Marcus manipulated you just like he manipulated me. The difference is that I found out his true nature before he could destroy your life completely. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he turned back to Sarah one final time. You think you've won, but you haven't. My family has connections, expensive lawyers. I'll be out in a few years, and when I am, I'll finish what I started. Sarah met his gaze steadily. No, Marcus, you won't, because this time everyone knows who you really are. Your family's reputation is destroyed, your business connections are worthless, and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison thinking about the woman you tried to kill for money. David offered no final threats or protests. His guilt had been a crushing weight for an entire year, and in some ways his arrest felt like a relief. As the officers guided him toward the police cars, he looked back at Sarah one last time. I know you can't forgive me, he said quietly, but I want you to know that not a day has passed when I haven't regretted what I did to you. Regret isn't enough, Sarah replied. But at least it's something. Maybe in prison, you'll find a way to become the person you should have been all along. As the police cars disappeared into the night, carrying Marcus and David away to face justice for their crimes, Sarah stood alone at Eagles Point for the first time since her fall. The cliff that had once represented her near death now symbolized her rebirth. She was no longer the trusting, naive woman who had been so easily manipulated and betrayed. The gentle florist who had believed the best of everyone was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more careful about whom she trusted. Sarah had lost her innocence in these waters a year ago, but she had gained something more valuable, the knowledge that she could survive anything, overcome any betrayal, and emerge stronger than those who tried to destroy her. Detective Morrison approached her as she stood looking out over the dark ocean. Ms. Mitchell, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to finalize your statement and sign some paperwork. But I wanted you to know that based on the evidence you've provided, both men will likely spend decades in prison. Thank you, Detective, Sarah replied. Justice was all I ever wanted. What will you do now? He asked. Will you stay in Millfield? Sarah considered the question as she watched the waves crash against the rocks below. This town held too many painful memories, too many reminders of the woman she used to be. It was time to start over somewhere new, to build a life based on who she was now rather than who she had been. No, she said finally, it's time to move on. There's a whole world out there and I have a second chance to experience it. This time I'll be smarter about who I trust and stronger in how I protect myself. As Sarah walked away from Eagles Point for what she knew would be the last time, she felt a sense of closure that had eluded her for months. Marcus and David would face the consequences of their actions. Lisa would eventually heal from her trauma, and Sarah herself could finally begin the process of truly moving forward. The woman who had once been pushed from this cliff for money had returned for justice, and she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. Now it was time to discover what kind of life she could build with the wisdom that had been purchased at such a terrible price.